Come be a part of Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics with your host, Dr. Ed Holliday. Hear the voices of liberty speaking all across America. Doc Holliday provides thought-provoking interviews and commentary about the issues and actions that are afflicting this country and what we need to do to get America back on track. Get fired up, get inspired, get on board with Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics right now.
And here we go.
And once again, that's the sound of rock cracking. You've got Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics right here on webtalkradio.net, and we're glad to have you. The election is on our doorsteps. This is the last show before you go vote. Some of you have already voted. It's very important to get out and vote because we have to get Donald J. Trump reelected. And in today's show, we are shining more light on the Biden family corruption. Yes, last week we had a show with Rick Gates that brought up all kind of corruption, alleged corruptions, real corruptions. And we'll continue on with Mike McCormick, who was the vice presidential stenographer several years when Vice President Biden was at the White House under President Obama, and he has put together some information, and we want to hear about it because you're not going to hear about it anywhere else but right here on Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. So I'm telling you now to tell your friends and neighbors, send this link on after you listen to this show. Nobody in their right mind would vote for Joe Biden to be our next president. You talk about swamp creatures. As President Trump has been draining the swamp, this is one swamp creature that's gotten bigger and bigger, and the corruption and what he represents in 47 years of doing nothing but being a part of the Washington, D.C. swamp. That's Joe Biden and his family, and now we are going to shine some light on it with Mike McCormick. Before we do, let me just play this clip from just this past few days of our new Supreme Court Justice, Amy Coney Barrett.
My fellow Americans, even though we judges don't face elections, we still work for you. It is your Constitution that establishes the rule of law and the judicial independence that is so central to it. The oath that I have solemnly taken tonight means at its core that I will do my job without any fear or favor, and that I will do so independently of both the political branches and of my own preferences. I love the Constitution and the democratic republic that it establishes, and I will devote myself to preserving it. Thank you.
Wow, will our new Justice Amy Coney Barrett become a rock star? Is Donald Trump on a roll? Did he look presidential at the swearing-in ceremony for Amy Coney Barrett? Of course he did. Now, is that going to be enough to push him into re-election? We don't know, but I'm telling you, there's a lot of excited people now that Amy Coney Barrett is sworn in and she's on the Supreme Court, and it was a grand slam home run by Donald J. Trump and working with Mitch McConnell and Republicans and to make sure she got confirmed by the Senate. I think this president is on a roll, and he needs to build on that momentum, build on the momentum of what he's going to do for America in the next 4 years, and expose this corruption of the swamp creature named Joe Biden. And that's what we're about to do before we get Mike McCormick on the line and talk to him about what he knows, and it'll build on some of the things you heard on last week's show with Rick Gates. If you did not hear that show, go back in the archives and listen to that show and this show and send it out to everybody you know that wants to vote for Joe Biden, because once they hear these shows, they'll know we don't need a swamp creature like Joe Biden and what he has done to just the corruption and the stink that he's brought in 47 years to the United States government. And that's what he's done with enriching his family. through his name, even when he was vice president of the United States. And we're going to be talking about that. But let me play this little clip from Newt Gingrich, who was on the Sean Hannity show.
Now, how comfortable are you? You have a potential president where the Communist Chinese, the Russians, the Ukrainians, and others all have something on his family, and where he lies about it every day. I mean, every time he says, I had nothing to do with it, it's not true. And in one particular case, the Chinese Communist dictatorship got $70 million to the University of Pennsylvania. Biden's centers at the University of Pennsylvania, he took out nearly $1 million personally. So when he says, oh, I didn't get a dime from China, no, he didn't. It was washed through the University of Pennsylvania.
Now, that was Newt talking about just the corruption in China, what China holds over the Biden family and Joe Biden in particular. But now, where is the mainstream media? They have been, it's pitiful. They've fallen down. Their heads are in the sand, purposely not bringing out this story at all, not even looking at it. When they spent 3 years on a Russian hoax and 30 hours of testimony in front of the House committee and Senate committees was Donald Trump Jr. for just a 10-minute meeting. No money. We got Hunter Biden $3.5 million from the former mayor of Moscow's wife. And we go on, and Mike's going to get some of these things and put some dates together so we'll better understand them. So just before we get him on, let me play this montage that Sean Hannity had on about the mainstream media and how they're talking about Hunter Biden and all the Biden family corruption.
Listen.
I just want to deal in fact, because there is so much speculation out there, and there is zero evidence that Hunter Biden or Joe Biden did anything wrong here.
We should note, again, and you and I have said this in the air many times, there is no evidence that Joe Biden was, involved in any wrongdoing.
Of course, I want to note that there is no evidence that Joe Biden or Hunter Biden has done anything wrong.
I just want to reiterate.
And let's be clear for the viewers.
There is no evidence Biden did anything wrong.
I'll note again, because it's important.
There is no, I repeat, no.
There is no evidence that either Biden did anything illegal.
There's been no evidence. There was no evidence.
There's no evidence. There is no evidence.
There is not an iota of evidence.
No evidence Biden did anything wrong.
There's really
no evidence that Joe Biden
did anything wrong.
Nobody's ever accused there's no
evidence whatsoever that Joe
Biden did
anything wrong.
Got that? Part of a Russian disinformation effort.
Described by many intelligence experts as having hallmarks, all the hallmarks of a Russian disinformation.
Russian disinformation
campaign.
This is a classic example of the right-wing media machine.
It's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable, and that's why we got on the line Mike McCormick. He's the vice presidential stenographer. He did work with Cheney and also vice president for several years, Vice President Joe Biden, and a little bit with Mike Pence. So let's get him on the line right now and shine some light on this Biden family corruption. On this week's show, very important, last show before the election, we have author Mike McCormick. He was the vice presidential stenographer, and he's got a new book out that's called Joe Biden Unauthorized and the 2020 Crack-Up of the Democratic Party. So welcome to Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics, Mike.
Thanks, Doc. It's going to be pretty interesting tonight. We got a lot to talk about with this laptop coming out.
Wow, there's so much stuff.
The beans, didn't it?
Yes, there's so much stuff coming out, and I know you have been in the middle of some of the things for our listeners. You were the stenographer for the press of the vice president, actually for Dick Cheney, then 8 years for Vice President Joe Biden, and then you covered, I believe, some with Mike Pence early on. Is that correct?
That's right. And actually, it was only 6 years with Joe Biden. There was a brief span of time in the middle of it all where I wasn't in the White House. I had gone to a different job down in Richmond, and then that went away in the downturn, in the big economic downturn, so I came back to the White House and worked for Joe Biden from 2011 to 2012. But, yeah, I worked for those three White Houses, so I don't have an axe to grind. I'm kind of a neutral observer, really, and it wasn't until after I left the White House, and I got to see Trump come in, and he's so good at what he does that I realized what a great president he is. And then when I realized Joe Biden was going to run for president, I decided to write this book, and I published it in March before all the COVID shutdown and everything. So this isn't a last-minute hit job by any means. This is kind of a measured, middle-of-the-road look at Joe, good and bad. But now what we're hearing, there's just so much more bad than I ever understood, really.
Well, that's why what we'd like to do in this conversation is let you reflect back now that some of these things are coming out with the Hunter Biden laptop and other things, see if we can put some pieces together and maybe discover some things that nobody else has talked about. But your book, actually, like you said, came out in March. You were thinking that book would help separate the logjam of all the Democratic candidates who were running for president and probably let people see that Joe Biden wasn't the retail politician that he was for 40 years as a senator. Was that your thought of the book coming out in March of 2020?
Yeah, exactly. And the thing was, as I was writing the book was when they were impeaching the president. And so that was like November, December. And as they were impeaching the president, I started digging into the Ukraine story, and that's when I came up with some interesting things. And we'll talk about that in a little while, about what I found with Ukraine. But, the whole thing with Joe, for a long time, what Joe always talked about was he was this big, close friend of the Chinese, especially Xi Jinping, the guy who's the current president of China. Chinese. So it was like, wow, what does Joe say in the election if Trump's standing up to him?
There's so much that we really want to just dig into, and I've seen your book, and I know I do want to encourage my listeners to go out and get that book, because I think you get the beginning of what's going on, and now all this stuff is pouring out about Hunter Biden and some of the things that we can put some pieces together. Just last week we had on our show, we had Rick Gates, who was talking about Vice President Biden when Rick Gates, who was the deputy manager of the Trump team, that campaign manager that got caught up in the Mueller probe, and him and Paul Manafort. And one of the things that he was saying, that Vice President Biden took 6 trips to the Ukraine, and trying to unearth some of these things that were going on. And one of the things that he got put in jail for, and Paul Manafort, was the fact that they never registered as a foreign agent. And as far as I know, Hunter Biden has never registered as a foreign agent.
Yeah, I mean, they have to have a grand jury look into this Biden thing and Burisma, plus in China. And I'll jump into China real quick, because there's really interesting things there. Well, the first time I went to China was with Joe was in 2011 in August. And it was a strange trip, because the Chinese started it off. Basically, they roughed up Joe Biden's staff in the middle of one of his speeches. He was doing his meeting, and all of a sudden they started shoving everybody out of the room. And it was a big, fancy meeting, and all of a sudden they just treated the staff like nothing. And they did that twice in the same trip.
And you were present on this trip. You were at the meeting?
I was in there. They were shoving me out too. I wrote about it in the book. And by the way, the book is on my website. JoeBidenUnauthorized.com is my website. And if you buy it off the website, I donate 10% to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund.
Oh, great.
So back to the story in China. So then he turns over. They started roughing him up. So then he turned over and started doing what they wanted. About 2 years later, in February 2012, so they've gone. They're getting ready for their big re-election campaign. The Xi Jinping is now in America. And he and Joe Biden put together this big trip. They're 2 vice presidents, and they're talking about the future of America, China. And they put together this trip that winds up in Hollywood. And Joe Biden in Hollywood in February 2012 introduces Xi Jinping to all these Hollywood big shots, movie producers, actors, all these guys, and makes a big deal, because at the time, Hollywood wanted to get a lot more access into China for the Chinese moviegoers. They wanted to sell more movies. And China had this restriction on how many movies could come in. And Joe puts together this deal with Xi Jinping, and all of a sudden the Hollywood guys are delighted because they've got all this new access. So that was a big thing for the Democrats. A lot of the Hollywood people were Democratic donors.
Right.
A lot for both Barack Obama and Joe Biden. And I think that's why Joe Biden eventually wound up being this presidential candidate this time, because he had a lot of backing out of Hollywood based on this deal. But what we've seen out of China is how China has manipulated that deal into they've sort of taken over the messaging of what Hollywood can and can't do, and they're weighing heavily on sort of influencing the culture through our Hollywood movies, and how some people in Hollywood are upset about it. Trump stood up to the Chinese with the trade war that he's been on, and that was the right thing to do. Everybody, I agree. I think most people on the line would agree. That was a smart thing he did. He really had to. Joe Biden is not that guy. Joe Biden will do what the Chinese tell him to do. And in 2013, as his reward for doing this big deal with Hollywood, he went over there, and I was on that trip. This is December 2013, and this is when Hunter was on the plane. And this is when they started rewarding the Biden family. And I don't think it was much as a reward as it sounded like it was what they call a honeypot, where, they trap a guy. They it's like a intelligence service term, a honeypot trap.
Let me jump in here, Mike. I know our listeners want to know what a honeypot trap is, and I want you to tell them. But let me just remind everybody, you're listening to us right here on webtalkradio.net. This is Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. We are talking to Mike McCormick, the author of the book called Joe Biden Unauthorized. We are shining a light on the Biden family corruption. And Mike McCormick is really helping us out and shining a bright light because he knows some of the things. He worked with the Bidens for many years, and now we talked about his book. Just remind everybody, Doc Holliday's got a book, wrote along with Dr. Alveda King, Dr. Alex McFarland, called Bedrock Truths. You can get that book by going to www.docholliday.org, Holiday with 2 L's in it. So go there and order that book. And now, Mike, just tell us what this honeypot trap is.
And you hold out this bait. Well, the bait is usually an attractive young woman, and the old guy gets in trouble. And then there's videotapes. Well, that's basically what they did to Hunter Biden. They did it with a lot of money, and they did it with young people that he was going around with over there. And so it just is really sleazy and seemly what they started to do there in China. And it just is shocking to me.
Now, Mike, go back just a second, because we know we talk about the Biden laptop and it's probably some very unseemly, they said, photographs and even films of cocaine and women on that laptop. Or do you think that the Chinese maybe set up Hunter as far as with women in China? Is that what you were implying then, or are you just saying it was more of the money in the honeypot trap?
I think it was both. And I think Hunter was so badly into drugs that he couldn't control himself. And I think he got pulled into some really bad situations that, he just didn't have self-control to be able. And Vice President Biden should have known that. And, at the time, Hunter Biden had a Secret Service detail. I don't know how they arranged to get him out and all that trouble, but he was in trouble in the middle of being protected by the Secret Service. And he's the Vice President's son. This is a foreign security national risk that they did, and there's no excuse for it. So what this laptop is, and I have every belief that it is accurate. It's not a Russian plant. It's just Joe Biden and Hunter Biden being dumb and greedy, and that's what they did, and they got caught on a laptop.
Wow. And that's where you were talking about this trip, and it's 2013, but this was not the trip that Hunter Biden got the hedge fund deal, is it? Or it was another one after this?
That's the trip. So that's when he goes and he starts doing the deal. And that deal was run through the Chinese government. So they sort of, they're slowly but surely pulling the Bidens into their orbit. And, they're trapped. I mean, right now, the trap is coming out. And so, they've got this laptop. I don't know how the actual connections are between who has a laptop, but the computer pyramid is the guy who's sort of, I believe his story. I think that's a reasonable way that he got this laptop. And knowing the Biden as I know him and the stuff that they've admitted to, I think this is Hunter Biden just being stupid and greedy and getting caught being careless. So this is 2013, this is December. It turns into 2014. Joe Biden really wants to run for president. But all of a sudden, Bo gets sick, and they don't tell anybody. And they didn't really know how seriously sick he was. But that really started to hurt on Hunter. So Hunter starts getting even worse. And so Joe goes over to Ukraine, and I think what happened was Joe went to Ukraine. I was on trips with him to Ukraine, and Poland is really where it happened. He goes into
Tell us about now, how does Poland get pulled into this?
This is where it gets interesting. Both Hunter Biden and Devin Archer, the two guys that are in that little company they had that got all this, they were on the board of Burisma. Both of them had said in various news reports, they got pulled onto the Burisma board by a guy named Alexander Kwasniewski. Alexander Kwasniewski is an old friend. I have this in my book. He's an old friend of the Biden family. He was the president of Poland when Joe and he were working on getting Poland into NATO back in the early 2000s.
Okay.
Well, and then he comes to America, and he's working at Georgetown as like a guest lecturer. And both Joe and Hunter were big supporters of Georgetown, so they had a lot of cross paths. Joe goes to, in March, he goes to Poland, and he's talking about we have to help Ukraine because Ukraine and Poland are neighbors. We got to help your neighbor Ukraine with their energy security. And who does he talk to there in Poland? I don't have specific records of it, but I think he went and talked to. That's where he talked to this guy Kwasniewski, and he set it up with Kwasniewski. I'll bring some stuff in for Burisma because at that time Kwasniewski was on the board of Burisma Holdings. He just named to the board of Burisma Holdings in January. In January, Kwasniewski's on the board. March, he meets with. Essentially, they cross paths in Poland with Vice President Biden. And the next thing you know, Hunter and Devin Archer are on the board of Burisma. And that's what a grand jury has to dig into. They got to dig that out. I don't have the proof in front of me, but I smell a rat there. And that's the same rat that President Trump smelled.
Now, getting us the overall picture, Crimea was invaded, a part of Ukraine. For our listeners who don't know, Crimea was a part of Ukraine, but Russia, when Putin came in and invaded Crimea, when Joe Biden was vice president and President Obama was there, and of course our intelligence had known that was about to happen, and yet they just, it happened and they go, oh, we were surprised. But now, do you think that had any ties into moving this Burisma and the gas company? Was that in any way tied into that?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. So what happened was Joe Biden is a phone guy. He's always on the phone. He was on the phone. The situation in Ukraine started in around December. So right about the time that Hunter Biden and Joe Biden go to China, Ukraine starts breaking out in this revolution. And Joe Biden is in China, but he's also on the phone to Ukraine. He's on the phone to the president of Ukraine saying, don't hurt those demonstrators, don't hurt those demonstrators. In the middle of February in 2014, the guy who's the president of Ukraine starts killing the demonstrators out in the street, and Joe Biden gets on the phone and says, you've got to stop killing these guys. We're going to come after you. You're going to face National Court of Justice. And so the guy stops shooting, and he leaves Ukraine, flees back to Moscow. That's where, he was sort of Putin puppet. And the democratic movement starts up in Ukraine. So for that reason, Joe Biden is highly regarded in Ukraine, and he becomes the point man on Ukraine. And as part of that, he knows he's got to help the Ukrainian energy industry. And, oh, by the way, I'll just slide Hunter and Devin Archer into these board seats and give them a lot of money. And that'll help Hunter. And in his back of his mind, he wants to backstop Hunter because Hunter is, in his personal life, is spiraling out of control. And I think Joe set it up. To me, at first, I thought Joe set it up to sort of help Hunter, but now I think Joe set it up to make a big chunk of money for himself. We'll see. That's where the grand jury has to come in. I think Donald Trump's going to win this election, and Donald Trump's going to name a grand jury to investigate this whole mess.
Well, I mean, it needs to be. It's unbelievable. We've gotten through 4 years of President Trump, and none of this has been investigated by the media. The media says it's already been looked at, and there's nothing there.
No, and they don't want to listen to me when I tell them about my book. I really appreciate you putting it on the radio because no one wants to hear it. And I've been trying to push this story around D.C., and it's just sort of stonewalled. But, it's coming out. And the thing is, it'll come out with a grand jury investigation. And the thing that I found that was really astonishing to me was, as I was digging into this, I came across some records of the White House visitor laws Well, this is the people that come and go in and out of the White House, and the Secret Service keeps a record of who they are. Well, in 2014, so this is right after Joe has gone into Poland and made this quid pro quo deal with these Burisma guys. I'll give you energy relief support, and you put Hunter on your board. He then is on his way to Ukraine to sort of finalize that side of it. As he's getting ready to go to Ukraine, there's a meeting in the White House on April 15, 2014, with Barack Obama, David Axelrod, Jim Messina, and David Plouffe in the Roosevelt room at 4:30 in the afternoon. Joe Biden is not in this meeting. Intentionally, this meeting is set up because Joe Biden is out of the building, and they want to talk about Joe Biden because I think they know there's some sketchy stuff going on with Hunter, and Joe's about to go over to Ukraine and do this deal with Burisma, and they're like going, we got some red flags going on here.
Right.
They had this meeting. I don't know what was said in the meeting. That's why we have to have a grand jury. But after the meeting, first thing in the morning, David Axelrod goes to a one-on-one meeting with Joe Biden in the Naval Observatory. It only shows up in the records. No one's reported this out there. There's no newspaper reporting, no TV reporting. It's in my book, and that's it.
And, Mike, and it's in your book, and you remember, if anybody remembers back during the Democratic primaries, David Axelrod was not a friend of Joe Biden. He kept
exactly.
He would come out for other candidates and really try to, I think, push Joe Biden down so somebody else would get in there. And
exactly.
I remember that.
100% right. He was undermining Joe Biden all the time. Yep. And there was no trust between the two. Axelrod didn't like Biden for doing all his side deals. He talked about it in the memoir that David Axelrod wrote. So, yeah, and so Axelrod goes and has this meeting. 4 hours after he has this meeting, this one-on-one breakfast, Joe Biden meets in his West Wing office with Devin Archer, his son's business partner. And there's this, just before these guys get named to the board of Burisma, I think they told Joe Biden, don't do it. Joe Biden ignored him. He went ahead with it. We know what the final outcome was. Those guys got millions of dollars out of Burisma.
Mike, let me stop you real quick because you're talking about they met, Joe Biden met with Hunter or Devin Archer. Is that on the books? Devin Archer being meeting with Joe Biden? Do we know that by White House logs?
Yeah. That's in the White House logs, and that was previously reported in Peter Schweitzer's book, Washington, Profiles and Corruption or something like that.
Okay.
And so that was previously reported, and I was looking at that meeting, and I said, I want to look at this, and I went through the White House logs, and I looked at the date, and the first person that was in the White House that day, in the White House complex, was Axelrod. I was like, why is Axelrod on this thing? And I looked over, it was the Vice President's residence. I was like, wait a minute, why is Axelrod talking to Vice President? He don't like them, and that's how I started digging into this.
Wow. I mean, that is so some fire where the smoke is when you see the smoke. But again, like you said, it takes a grand jury to really separate it out and find out what's going on. But now, and like I said, Rick Gates was saying how these trips that Vice President Biden took to the Ukraine. So he came back once his son Hunter and Devin Archer were on the board of Burisma. He came back to the Ukraine. Is that correct?
Yeah, he went back a couple times. There was another important trip that also occurred right after about middle of May 2014. So this was just about a couple of weeks after Joe had gone to Ukraine for the first time with all this aid. He goes to Cyprus. It's a funny trip. It's a weird place for a vice president to go. No vice president's gone there since Lyndon Johnson.
Wow.
So he goes to Cyprus. Cyprus is the money laundering capital of Europe. All the Russian mafia guys and Ukrainian mafia guys have their money laundering there. That's where Burisma Holdings is registered. The guy who runs Burisma Holdings, Mykola Zlochevsky, is in Cyprus. That's where all his dirty money goes into when he's trying to launder it. I don't know what happened with Joe Biden there, but we got to get a grand jury to investigate because he was there for a day and a half, and it's just an out-of-the-way, nondescript trip, and they could have got together, and somebody's got to ask him. Nobody's asked him. No press has ever asked him. Did you talk to Mykola Zlochevsky when you were in Cyprus? Nobody's asked him this stuff.
You know, this is unbelievable. We got a presidential election in just a few days, and nobody's asked him. Of course, he doesn't make himself available to the press. Even if the press would have somebody would ask him that, he doesn't make himself available. So I'm glad you're on, Mike, and telling us these things and about Cyprus. And then it's just it's unbelievable how all this is. They've hidden it ever since we knew, even with the impeachment, that something was going on. And now the news media just acts like they're putting their head in the sand.
Yeah. And the thing is, so Obama has this meeting with these guys. So they knew Joe Biden was committing malfeasance. And the thing that I talk about in the book is, and this is why I called it, and the 2020 crack up the Democratic Party. Those guys knew. So they covered it up. That's a cover-up involving Barack Obama and those guys in that meeting. And the question is, how far into the Democratic Party does it go? Because they impeached Donald Trump over the fact that he thought Joe Biden was doing something crooked in Ukraine. And lo and behold, Joe Biden was doing something crooked in Ukraine, and it was an illegitimate impeachment. And so they've got to go back and look at who did Obama talk to about this malfeasance of Joe Biden? Did he talk to Nancy Pelosi? Did he talk to Chuck Schumer? How many Democrats that voted for it knew that Joe did, in fact, commit malfeasance in office? That's a really serious thing. That's what a grand jury really has to do. Theoretically, every Democrat that voted for that impeachment, Senate and House, should be in front of a grand jury and under oath explaining why they voted the way they voted.
That is why, Mike, what you just brought out is so true. Everyone, how many knew this about how far the vice president had gone. We know President Obama knew it. Axelrod knew it. They had the meeting about it, and then they've covered it up. You talk about a cover up. You think Watergate's a cover up? Man, this is a lot bigger than Watergate when you talk about covering something up.
Exactly. This is really serious. This is right, and this is right at the election. We got to get Donald Trump in there, and they got to get a grand jury to look at this.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for being on Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. I want everybody to go out and read your book, Joe Biden Unauthorized. You've opened up so much which needs to be said and questions that need to be asked. So thank you for coming on this show, and hopefully we'll get some answers one day.
Thanks, Doc. Thanks for having me, and we're going to win this election, and it's going to be an interesting year.
Yeah, let's remind everybody to get out and vote. Take somebody with you. Find somebody who probably wasn't going to vote and drag them to the polls, because it's whoever gets the most people out is going to win.
That's it.
Mike McCormick, thank you for being on Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. It is the most important election of our lifetimes, many say, in the history of America. You can't find two more contrasting figures running for president. You got a choice between President Donald J. Trump and his recognized, proven way to build an economy. And we had a great economy before the coronavirus came in from China. But now we got Biden, who wants to push us towards socialism. So you have got to make the decision to get out and vote. There is no sitting on the couch and watching. You got to get involved. This is what America is. This is what freedom is about. If you love your liberty, get out and vote. Make sure everybody you know votes for Donald J. Trump and get him a Republican House and a Republican Senate. Very important. And Mike McCormick, what a great job he's done in helping us shine this light on the swamp creature known as Joe Biden and the corruption of the Biden family. And tell your friends and neighbors, anybody who wants to vote for Joe Biden, tell them to listen to this show and last week's show with Rick Gates. And let's get the word out there. Donald J. Trump needs to be reelected President of the United States.
Thanks for joining us today, and remember to listen again next week for another edition of Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. You can order Ed's new book, Bedrock Truths, by clicking on the book cover right in front of you on the screen, or visit DocHolliday.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.